to the Welcome everyone to the Under Overqualified webinar presented by the Membership and Professional Development Committee and Workshops Committee of the Rare Books and Manuscripts section of the Association of College and Research Libraries. My name is Julie Tanaka, and I'm joined today by Albert Palacios, Margarita Vargas Betancourt, and John Overholt. We're happy to have all of you join us today and are honored to be here. I am co-chair of the RBMS Diversity Committee and am presenting from Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona. ASU is located in the Salt River Valley on ancestral territories of indigenous peoples, including the Acoma Otham, Pima, and Peepash Maricopa Indian communities. Under Overqualified, the question of more degrees is one of 8 webinars being offered in the RBMS Jobs and Hiring Workshop Series, and is the final installment. The overarching goal for this series is to connect individuals in galleries, libraries, archives, museums, and special collections, otherwise known as GLAMs, with other professionals who can share advice and experiences on different aspects of the job market and hiring practices in a variety of related professions. RBMS membership is not required either to present or participate. Now for some housekeeping. And I'm going to drop the 3 links I'm going to mention into chat right now. Hopefully they go out. The hashtag for the series is hashtag RBMS Jobs Hiring. This session is being recorded, as you know. A link of the video will be sent out to everyone who is registered. And the chat is open and may be saved, but it is not being recorded. During this event, we ask that you adhere to the American Library Association's Statement of Appropriate Conduct, which can be reviewed at, and the link is in the chat, ala.org/conferences/statement_appropriate_conduct. We thank you in advance for abiding by these guidelines. If you encounter any issues, please get in touch with the hosts. You can also share your feedback by email at membership@rbms.info. Our program will run for an hour. We received numerous questions in advance of the session, so the questions I've gone through and synthesized them into shorter ones. Q&A function is also available, and if time permits, we'll address questions that are put into the Q&A. We've already gone through the captioning, so I'll skip that. And so now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our panelists. Albert Palacios is Digital Scholarship Coordinator at the Teresa Lozano Long Institute of Latin American Studies, Benson Latin American Studies and Collections at the University of Texas at Austin. He has also served as a film curatorial assistant at the Harry Ransom Center from 2010 to 2015, where he trained and supervised graduates in preservation, cataloging, processing, exhibition, and the digitization of audiovisual and manuscript collections. He holds a bachelor's degree in architecture and anthropology, an MS in information science, and an MA in Latin American studies, as well as a PhD in history, all from the University of Texas at Austin. Margarita Vargas Betancourt is Latin American and Caribbean Special Collections Librarian at George A. Smathers Library at the University of Florida. In 2016, she was part of the team that got the SAA Diversity Award for Latin American and Cultural Heritage Archive Section webinar series, Breaking Down Borders. Margarita holds a BA in Hispanic Literature and Language from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and both an MA and PhD in Latin American Studies from Tulane University. Our third panelist, John Overholt, is curator of the Donald and Mary Hyde collection of Dr. Samuel Johnson and early books and manuscripts at Houghton Library, Harvard University. He was also a rare books cataloger at the Ransom Center, at the Harry Ransom Center, Humanities Research Center at the University of Texas at Austin. John holds a BA in political science from Washington University and a master's in library and information science from UT Austin. Please join me in welcoming our speakers today. There were quite a few questions, so let's jump right in. The questions I've divided into 5 overarching categories, and I thought we would start answering 3 from each category because there are quite a few, so that we get through all of the categories, and then time permitting, we'll loop back and address other ones. I invite all of our panelists to jump in to provide commentary and your insights about each of the questions as we go through. And if you don't have anything to add, you're more than welcome just to say pass, and then we can move on. Okay, are our panelists ready? The first question, this falls into the category of, will another degree help or hinder my job prospects, or does it even matter? Question number one, does having a PhD prevent you or hinder you from getting an entry-level position? And beyond that, does it help or hinder for other positions? Albert, do you want to start?
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel, and thank you all for joining us today. Pretty much, what I'm hoping to share is just my experience and my thoughts, maybe opinions based on what I've seen in my current position, but then also previous to this panel, I did a little bit of research in terms of what's out there in the market. And so hopefully I'm hoping that I can channel some of that information. In terms of the question that you posed, I think it's possible that employers might think that a PhD holder might not be satisfied with an entry-level position in the long term. So I think it really depends on how you frame that experience, the experience that you will be receiving if you were given the entry-level position in your cover letter. So if you focus specifically on how that experience will help you shift careers, for example, and demonstrate a vested interest in the new pathway or new line of work that you're thinking of going towards, then I think an employer might consider you less of a flight risk, you might think, or you might say.
Julie, you're muted, but I can follow up. Okay, well, I'll follow up then. I do agree with Albert. I've seen sometimes that having a PhD does, for an entry-level position, is an obstacle, but also and I'm talking about working at the University of Florida. That's the institution I know. I don't know, I haven't worked in others. I worked at Tulane, but that was in another life. It doesn't hinder from entry-level positions, even perhaps to a little bit an unfair competition. Like for entry-level positions, people who have experience competing with somebody who has a PhD, sometimes the position has gone to the person with the PhD. But again, this is not a general rule. It's just something I have seen at my particular institution.
Okay, thank you. John, what about at your institution?
So one issue that particularly occurs to me in that scenario is sort of what is the orientation of the person who's applying for this position. And, I think lots of us who work in the library field are aware that the job market for faculty positions is, extremely rough and competitive. And I think if you're somebody who has had sort of a lifelong goal of working in libraries, it's natural to sort of have the concern as somebody's hiring for a position like that somebody's coming to this as sort of a second choice. And I think that might be the sense in which it could potentially be a hindrance, because you want to know that somebody's coming to this position with a sort of a full embrace of librarianship as the career that they're interested in. But obviously, academic libraries in particular are places that highly value credentials. So credentials are very often a strong selling point.
Great, thank you, John. The second question is related. This takes us to the next higher level, is about what types of degrees are useful and required for anyone interested in moving on to a library administration position, whether at an academic research library or other libraries, including public libraries and special libraries. Again, maybe if we just go through in kind of the same order, Albert, Margarita, and John, if you want to alternate there.
I guess I can, well, Margarita, if you want to go first, then maybe we can alternate it.
You go, Albert.
I guess it really depends on the job that you're applying to. If you're applying for a job, where the focus is on interpretation, education, or management, subject specialization and leadership experience might outweigh or compensate for having an MSIS, MLIS degree. So as I mentioned already yesterday, I was looking through some of these positions in museums, libraries, and archives, and it seems like having an MSIS, MLIS seems to be either the overwhelming requirement or at least a highly preferred degree, considering how many graduate students are graduating from these programs. I think even though it's marked as a preference, there's quite a few people out there with these degrees. So I think it's becoming more of a requirement, I'd say.
Well, just to follow up, I guess I do have to say something here. I work in the libraries. I'm faculty, I'm associate faculty, I have tenure. I don't have a master's in library science. I got where I am through my PhD in Latin American Studies and a graduate assistantship that I had at Tulane. So I worked at the libraries there with archives and paleography, and that expertise was the one that allowed me to qualify for the job at the University of Florida. I believe that there is right now a chair in my, not in my department, but in the George Chase Mathers libraries. And like me, she doesn't have a master's in library science. She has a PhD in English. So I guess for me, the problem with these questions, and I'm happy to discuss them and answer to the best of my ability, is that there is no recipe, there's no formula. It's very relative, and I'm sorry if this is causing disappointment, but it does depend on each institution, each position. Perhaps what I would say is, for me, the most important thing is your work experience and your network. But we can explore this in further questions.
Well, thank you. That kind of segues into Marguerite into something that I wanted to mention, which is presumably it's obvious from the introduction, but I don't have a subject degree other than my MLIS, and I'm always a little reluctant to hold out my career path as any kind of example to people, because the current position I have involves a lot of good fortune. There were 2 failed searches for the curator of early modern books and manuscripts at Houghton during the time that I was assistant curator. And I don't want to say they turned to me in desperation, but I might not have, with the credentials that I have, I might not have been able to get that position had it not been for the fact that they really needed somebody to fill that job. And I've been, doing the job of assistant curator already. But so I offer that as a caveat in talking about these issues, that I'm very lucky to have the job I have. I think I do a good job at the job I have, but I might not have gotten it under every circumstance. With regard to the question that we started initially with, I just wanted to mention the issue of, if thinking in terms of leadership and administration positions, specifically in the special collections world, there tend to be 2 different sort of models for like who is the director of a major special collections library. There are certainly instances where the model is somebody moves up through a series of responsible positions within a library. There's also the model where the leader is more somebody with an academic or faculty background, and under the reasoning that those people are well positioned to serve the target interests of the library, the users of the library. So I think both of those models exist in the field.
Yeah, thank you, all three of you. I think that's an important point. And I know from my own experience getting to where I am right now, it very much does depend on the position. There's no, from my own experience, there's no rhyme or reason for sometimes why things happen. And each position has varied so differently that I wish there were a magical answer where it's like, oh yes, you need this and that. And this will, if you have these two things, then you're eligible for, this pot of jobs. And if you have these two things, then you can throw yourself into this other pot over here. But I think that's sound advice that a lot of this is, depends on the position itself. And I think it comes across to how you market yourself and the skills that you have in your experience. And I fully agree that sometimes it's just a matter of a little bit of luck, because that's how I got here. I'm going to move on because some of the other questions in the first category do really relate to experience on a broad level. So I'd like to move into our second category that's titled Degrees versus Experience. And I was wondering if our panelists can talk a little bit on any advice you might have for people who have kind of concentrated initially on gaining degrees, whether it was the MLS or a master's degree or a PhD, and so they're qualified on paper, right? You've got your degrees, but they don't have as extensive of work experience, and what advice you might have for people of negotiating between the two. And I'm wondering if Margarita, if you might start, because you had mentioned this about the internship that you had, and then Albert and John, please feel free to comment.
Sure, I actually really like this question. Degrees against experience. So let me talk about myself first, and then I'll get to a generalization. I was a graduate student at Tulane, and my graduate assistantship was at the Latin American Library at Tulane. I worked there for many years. At some point, I thought maybe I won't be an academic, so I want to continue like working in this library. Without that work experience, I wouldn't be where I am today. Like if I had just had the PhD, I wouldn't be here. So tough as it is to have experience in life, if you're doing a PhD or a master's degree and you want to work in a library, you need that experience. And actually I work a lot with undergraduate students, and they get a work study job at the Latin American Caribbean Library. And at some point several have come and asked me, how do I get a job in libraries being undergraduate? So I always tell them, well, if you want to, you can do an independent study with me. You can apply for an internship. I can apply for an internship or a fellowship. And once you work with me, I'll train you in archives, processing archives, or in doing digital projects, or we learn together. And those lines that they get through these experiences in their resume, even at the undergraduate level, get them jobs at the master's and at the PhD also. So don't neglect. I know it's too much, but if you want to work in libraries, you need the experience. You need practical lines in your resume.
I completely agree with Margarita. Well, for those of you, right, who have been pursuing graduate degrees and haven't really had a chance to develop the experience, I would say when you're marketing yourself, try to hone in on work projects or classroom work projects, and try to frame them as much as possible as practical experience. But if you're taking the degree now, you're earning your degree, I'm right there with Margarita. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't taken a variety of internships, positions throughout my graduate career to be able to not only have the experience, but then also have a varied experience and make myself as marketable as possible. So, I did conservation work, I did cataloging work, digitization, volunteer for exhibition. I did a little bit of everything just so I can, number one, first figure out whether or not I wanted to pursue that as a career, and also understand which ones I didn't want to pursue as a career, but then also to gain that experience so that whenever I put myself out there, I had a varied list of resume points, right, that I can really highlight. And just like Margarita students, right, our students who have worked under our digital scholarship office, a couple of them actually just they've gone to the market and they've been presenting their capstone projects as like the showcase project in which they talk about what they know based on how they applied it in this particular project. So again, that experience is crucial to not only selling yourself, but also concretely demonstrating to employers that you have done the work, right? That you have implemented the theory and practice that you learned in graduate school.
Yeah, so I also strongly agree with what both of you have said. And I guess I would say that I think librarianship in particular is very much learned on the job. Like I'm actually a really enthusiastic believer in library education, in teaching people, educating people in the profession of librarianship and teaching people how to think like a librarian. But most of the skills that a library class might teach you, even though I work with very old books, I work with technology a lot too, and those things turn over extremely quickly. My class on reference in library school was done on CD-ROMs and pay by the hour databases through a dumb terminal. So that particular training doesn't play a ton of a role in my particular job today. So I think hiring managers are very interested in seeing real world experience in libraries in the resumes of anybody they're looking at.
Great, thank you. So far, it seems like everyone is in agreement about experience being extremely important in different ways of getting it, whether it's through projects in library school or on the job related. And yeah, there's nothing like gaining experience on the job, because you can read about it as much as you want in a book, and it's not quite the same when you hit the ground running, for sure. Another question comes from people who have gone through and earned their PhD already, and they're applying for jobs. This person wants to know if you have any advice, and I guess Margarita and Albert, this might fall to you first, about how do you weave the PhD into the narrative when you're talking through a job interview for a non-academic position. Granted, you're both in academic positions right now, but if you have any advice about that.
I can start. Margarita, do you want to start? I guess for how to weave your PhD experience. In the past, you know, when I brought up my master's and, you know, recently got my PhD, but the way that I would see it, you know, injecting it if I were to apply to a different position, would be very much sticking to the relevancy of the subject expertise that I developed to the job position itself. I wouldn't just kind of name drop it. And I think one of the questions that was on here was, you know, it being perceived as elitist, right, for you to put on your PhD. One thing we have to keep in mind, right, we're submitting the resume, so all of that is listed on there. So if you just drop it into your cover letter without really connecting it meaningfully to how that experience, either the knowledge that you've acquired, context specialization you've acquired, will contribute to collection development or to exhibition development, et cetera, or how some of the technical skills that you might have developed during that PhD program, how those are applied or applicable to the position that you're applying for, then I'd say, you know, maybe don't bring it up unless there's that direct relevance there. Again, because it's not in your CV or in your resume. But I think, you know, be sure that it's applicable to the position itself.
How to market your PhD. So I can talk about, again, from where I stand, and that's all I can share with you. So I don't think when I was applying for the position, I did talk about my studies, about my PhD, but to be very frank, my PhD and my expertise is in colonial Mexico. And I was applying for the position at the time, it was called Caribbean Basin Librarian. So what they wanted is more knowledge on the Caribbean than on Mexico. But of course, so I just said, well, if you learn colonial Mexico, it's because you learned a lot of a lot about the Caribbean and the rest of the continent. But I don't think that's what got me the job. Later on, I have used the expertise, like that subject expertise, for example, in my tenure packet, because when you study colonial studies, you can see very well and you can transfer those skills to underrepresentation, misrepresentation, exclusion, issues of diversity. So that's where I have used the expertise. I always bring it up, even in my bio. So that's the way I have used it, but that's a tricky question. I mean, because experience again is more important. So if it's just the PhD, is tricky. You need to have some experience. So either get it when you're studying your PhD, when you're ABD, and just writing. If you can just even an independent study with a librarian, that works. If you're done, maybe apply for a clear postdoc, and then get that experience so that you can like combine both things. And maybe there are other postdoc opportunities. So if not, we should create them.
Thank you. John, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the most important advice about this that I could give, having been on a number of hiring committees at Houghton and just been the hiring manager within the last couple of years for one myself, the cover letter is a story that you're telling about yourself, and it should not simply restate all the qualifications that you're listing in the resume. It should really be a persuasive argument about why you care about this particular position and why your skills and experience make you a good fit for it. And I know that it can be hard to keep that fresh when you're applying for a lot of different jobs, but I really think it's crucial to make that case for yourself in the cover letter, whatever your particular combination of circumstances, in a way that feels compelling and genuine, like really communicate with the end reader of that application about why this particular job is particularly of interest to you.
And I'm going to add to everything, all the great advice you've given on this topic. I got my PhD first before the library thing ever came into the picture. And I did apply for jobs outside of the academy. And I found that when I had to tell the story that I had a PhD and people were saying, well, you're overqualified for this position. And I'm like, I don't see how I'm overqualified for this, but it was a matter of translating the skills that I had gained into what I think of, more everyday common language. So I wrote a dissertation, right? Well, that translates in some ways as project management. It's a huge project that you have to figure out and figure out, what the priorities are, how to manage the time, things of that nature. You're preparing classes, how do those skills translate into the everyday world? Well, it's preparation, it's organization, it's time management, but it's also essentially supervising people, educating people, training. So when I thought about this, when I was at the time seriously considering leaving the academy and going into the non-academic world, I was looking at job ads that were out there and the type of language that they were using and say, do I have those skills? Oh yeah, when you do this. And I was trying to create parallels that way and then translating the academic language into what I was seeing in industry at the time. So just my 2 cents about the non-academic world. I was lucky that I did end up coming back into the library degree, but you have to do the same thing when you're applying for a library program. If you are a person who holds the PhD already and you're making your way back into the library field, translating what you've done and how it relates to library and information science. All right. I'm looking at the time and I do want to save some time at the end for the questions that are coming in from this current group. So we're moving on to the third category of financial questions and any advice that you might have about paying off debts, especially if people are thinking of making the decision between paying off a debt or perhaps using that money toward another degree, whether it's a second master's or a PhD. John, do you want to start since you're on my?
Sure. I would say do not go into debt to pay for a PhD to with the plan of having a career in librarianship. I don't think that makes economic sense. I think, you know, PhDs that are funded could potentially make sense in that regard. But man, do not do a PhD that you have to pay for yourself. I don't think that'll be economically remunerative. I was really fortunate that you know, my wife and I moved to Texas a few years before I was ready to go to library school, and so I got, I think, a really fabulous education at UT Austin for an extremely reasonable amount of money. And I would, you know, say that if you are thinking about, you know, library degrees in the same regard, I you know, I think see if your state institution offers an MLIS, or whether there's one maybe you could move to. You know, because the kind of debt that you can take on in an extended program like that can be really crushing. And, you know, I'm lucky to have a pretty good paying job in librarianship, but those are definitely few and far between.
Albert?
I think one thing that we have to remind ourselves is that, especially with student loan debt, is that there are programs out there that we can take advantage of, like the public service loan forgiveness program. I know that I'm definitely taking advantage of that. Yeah, just like John said, I was fortunate enough that my PhD was pretty much paid for, except towards the end, but even that was minimal compared to my MSIS degree, which I mostly had to pay for that. But yeah, just to say, you know, there's programs out there. Also, corporations, you know, from networks and colleagues who have kind of moved away from libraries towards you know, taxonomy positions in corporations, etc. Some of them do provide or they offer loan assistance, or they can negotiate for loan assistance to be able to cover some of those costs. So just kind of keep that in mind if you decide to shift gears towards the corporate realm, that you can potentially leverage that as part of your recruitment package.
I would also say, do not go into debt. I mean, it's like not a good idea. Well, and I have two thoughts about this. There are scholarships out there. The SAA had Mosaic, I think was the name, but I mean, the Society of American Archivists had one scholarship. I don't know if they still have it. There's the Knowledge River at the University of Arizona. I mean, just try to identify those opportunities. And also, many institutions, or at least the University of Florida, one of the benefits they have for employees, and not only faculty, any employee, is after you work here for 6 months, they pay 6 credits. So basically you could do a master's for free as an employee. And one of my students, Katiana Bague, who was the ARL Fellow for Digital Inclusion and Excellence, she started working in the libraries. And after 6 months, she entered the master's in Latin American Studies. She's finishing right now, and now she probably can apply to faculty positions for free. And that's one of the things she told me that was one of the most important lessons she got from her fellowship. When she went to ARL and met with other fellows, she learned that many were getting masters without getting debt.
Yeah, it's not good to get into debt because it's really hard to pay off. Just an extra burden right now. Here's and this was a fairly widely asked question by numerous people, was does having additional advanced degrees help you in negotiating salaries, higher salaries?
So I'm only, you know, really knowledgeable about how it works at my institution, but you know, when I did the hiring for the position that I did recently, they told me right off the bat that, you know, the starting salary wasn't non-negotiable, but it was negotiable within an extremely narrow range. And that's in part not just, you know, Harvard being stingy, but because they actually work very hard to maintain salary equity across all the employees at Harvard in that particular position grade. And so as a consequence, you know, a lot of things are sort of baked into the grade of the position from the start. So I think, you know, it could make a difference, but at my particular institution, I think it would be pretty minimal compared to, say, the cost of a degree.
Margarita or Albert, do you want to?
I can follow. I think also in my institution, it makes no difference. What makes a difference would be subject expertise if it is required, or a language, another language. That's, but not the degree. Like if you complete a degree, I think, because at the same time now I'm thinking one of my students, an undergraduate student, she began an entry job, and we're talking about entry jobs, before she graduated, like 1 month before. And now that she has graduated, they're gonna raise her some dollars each hour. But we're talking about entry jobs.
I'm going to echo what Margarita and John say. I don't think, at least that's my knowledge, is in my institution won't necessarily pay you more for another degree. Yeah, they might give you a merit raise based on your performance, but I think that's pretty much all. Maybe where you can use your education to leverage a higher salary is if you're maybe going for a promotion, another position that's going to require you to do a lot more managerial work, for example. Or maybe, if you are looking for another job, that could be another way to kind of leverage that salary and then maybe potentially leverage it back. But just, as a standalone, at least I don't think in my institution we do that.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move on to our next category, and this concerns timing of degrees for someone thinking about going back to get a second master's degree. Any recommendations for when a good time is, whether you should do it as soon as you get the job, or if you should wait a couple of years or not do it at all?
I can.
Albert, want to start?
Yeah, I can start that. I think Margarita pointed out something that I think it's well, I don't know. It's also in our institution where you after 6 months, you're able to take classes for free as part of your incentives as a staff member. I think it's like a perfect opportunity for you to assess whether or not you're interested, right, in the next in the other graduate degree that you might be looking towards. But then also you can take advantage of those benefits to potentially obtain your master's for free, and then start using that to specialize either in content or maybe get another technical skill alongside with that. So I think maybe a year, 2 years into your job, once you kind of got in a good footing as to what you're doing, and you're able to take on a potential second degree, that could be a good time for that.
Just to add on that, and perhaps because I've seen a lot of colleagues, a lot of coworkers, they get the master's in library science as they are working in the library, and I think that the experience and the projects they're working in, it correlates, and it is a very good complement to what they're learning at school. So I don't know, it might be more meaningful to go back when you're working. It's more work and you have to do the life balance situation, but
Doable. John, do you want to add anything?
I mean, I guess my personal answer is never. I'm not going to do that. I'm married to somebody with a PhD, and I've seen how hard it is, and I want no part of that, man.
I like your honesty there. I'm going to skip the second question or timing, because all three of you have already addressed that too. That was also about kind of the work-life balance if you are going back to earn another degree while you're working. So I'm going to move into our last category and combine this with the questions that have come in through the current question and answer session, so that we address those too. There's a question about so-called curator positions right now that seem to suggest that a PhD or specialization in a particular area is suggested. And this person wants to know, from your experience, is this becoming kind of the unwritten rule that hiring committees are looking for, that they are looking for a PhD or some sort of very specialized training for positions as collections managers, exhibit managers, registrars, and curators? Anyone? I'll leave it up to.
I would love to hear Albert.
Well, I know. So when this is my own personal experience, and I don't know, it was what, it was almost 9 years ago when I got my MLAS and MA. I really wanted to go towards curatorship. And I applied to quite a few institutions, and every single one of them, I got beat out by a PhD holder. So I think, at least then, it was definitely almost preferred, not a requirement, even though it wasn't stated on the requirements. I think now it really depends. It depends on the institution, the size of the institution, also the fiscal context that a lot of academic libraries and nonprofit or cultural institutions are finding themselves in. I think they're having to do, staff are having to do more and wear different hats. And so I think maybe there's some flexibility in terms of having the content specialization. But I think that's to a certain extent market driven, in my opinion. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Again, the smaller institution, I think you'll have more flexibility on that. The larger ones that, where let's say, for example, the curators are expected to be publishing and creating these exhibitions, I think maybe the expectation is still there. But I think it's in flux.
So
I also have the, sorry, John, go ahead.
Okay. I was just gonna say, I don't know that I can definitively say one way or the other, what's happening in the job market, but I do have a really strong opinion about how the profession ought to think about this question. And it's shaped by the fact that my curatorial department covers literally 2 millennia of time, and all the subject matter that the Harvard Faculty of Arts and Sciences might decide to teach. And no person could be an expert in all of that. And I'm not sure that it makes sense to look for somebody who has the intense focus and deep knowledge of having done a PhD in one little slice of that. I think it makes more sense to think of generalism and the ability to know a little bit about an extremely wide range of things as a positive skill set that really fits with the work that a curator does. I am never more of an expert on any particular piece of subject matter than the researcher or user that I'm dealing with. I'm an expert in the subject of Houghton Library and how to find things at Houghton Library and what our collections are and the peculiarities of our systems for retrieving those, and how to match those users with those materials. And then their subject expertise takes over once I've gotten them in touch with that. But I would really, I'd like to celebrate the idea of generalism and having an extremely wide base of knowledge as its own kind of skill to bring to the work of librarianship.
Well, Thank you, John. I really like your ideas. I think it's not only generalism, but also like a very specific skill set. And I do agree with Albert. I think there was a trend to hire PhDs. I do think it's changing because people are asking for skills that you get in libraries, but it's difficult to know. It's very, very difficult to know. At least in my institution, it's changing a little bit.
I think that's a fair assessment too. I've seen there was a push for PhDs for a while, and it seems like it's starting to also open up and emphasize skills and experience as well. So, all right, I do want to make sure we get to the questions that have come in from our live audience. So I'm going to move to that, and I'm going to read the question. Do you find preference for recent graduates for entry-level jobs in contrast to more experienced professionals that have not had the opportunity to become directors or coordinators of divisions or departments, and may not even want to?
I think that is very difficult to answer. At my institution, I could say, well, maybe there's differences in terms of departments. For example, the Department of Special Collections does tend to hire the second, like older, more established professionals. Whereas Library West, which is the library for the humanities and the social sciences in general, that one tends to hire alumni, young alumni, recent graduates who have worked in the library. So they know, they're experts in the George Chase Mathers libraries, as John described it. But again, those are the two. I mean, it's the two patterns that I can see.
Other thoughts, Albert, John? All right, next question. How important are presentations and publishing for being considered for positions? Do on-the-job accomplishments carry as much weight?
I think going back to what we discussed before, experience is weighted very heavily. At least, in my experience, it's been weighted and very heavily than publications and presentations. At least for the jobs that I've had. I don't know if that's, obviously it's my own personal experience, so I wouldn't be able to say it's more broadly like that.
So the position that I hired for recently, I think I got something like 50 applications from that made it through the sort of initial screen through HR. And when you're seeing that volume of applications, you're not very likely, certainly at any kind of initial stage of weeding that down further, to follow out those CV lines to see, does this article look like it's really well written or not? I think there's just, you've got to make a very quick read of the CV and of the cover letter and make your decisions about who's a strong candidate based on that, without having the time to do a lot more pursuit of the work that they've done. And so, to me, that would suggest that, as Albert was saying, those experience lines are probably the most vital and the ones that will make the most impact on a hiring manager, rather than the presentations and articles.
I would just want to say at the University of Florida, the librarians are considered as faculty, and one of the requirements, and we have several faculty positions open at the moment, one in my library. So one of the requirements is provide evidence of being able to get tenure through scholarship. So that means presentations in conferences and publications. If there's nothing in the CV, you're not fulfilling that requirement, but that's only for faculty positions. So yes, in the case of faculty positions at my institution, those things are essential. If it's a staff position, it's not. No, it's just not a requirement.
And I should just add that, my experience and understanding of these issues is definitely shaped by the fact that Harvard librarians do not have faculty status, and there's no promotion system even outside of that. Like Yale, for example, I think has a librarian 1, 2, and 3, and we do not have that that kind of system. So the professional activities that I have done have mostly been because I thought they were important and satisfying. They really don't affect my employment status in any way.
Same here.
Great, thank you. We have 3 more questions and we're running down on time here. So maybe if I can get at least one response to each of the remaining questions as we go through. So this one says, for mid-career librarians or library professionals with an MLIS, would a PhD in a subject content or a doctor of education be essential to advance in their career in an academic library? Albert shaking his head no. I think based upon our conversations, this comes down to it all depends. Each position is different, so it depends on what they're looking for.
But I would like to jump in there. I think that if you're a mid-career librarian and you already have a job, the PhD, as John said, oh my God, it's so painful. It really is like a sacrifice. It's and you are dealing with a lot of battles of power with somebody who has a lot of power over your life. If you already have a job, get another master's if you want to serve in one of the associations. I mean, there's so much growth within all of the institutions, all of the associations that are related to library science. Mentor students, do networking. I think that would be more important to advance your career, networking, more than a PhD. The PhD, in my opinion, has been made into an unachievable ideal that doesn't transfer into money, frankly.
Sound advice there. All right, the next question. So this one and one more after it. This person wants to know if it's important to think about who places value on the additional degrees. For example, if it's a donor that's placing emphasis on the additional degree, is this something that we, as the person applying for the job, should really take time to think about? Oh, it's silent. Any comments?
That is a very difficult question. I mean, I don't know if I'm answering or not. As a librarian, I work a lot with donors, and sometimes if what they expect or what they want or their position in the institution, if it's an emeritus, if it's a former director, if it's a friend of the dean, then they bring a lot of power and they might request things that you don't understand. I think that if as a librarian, if in my position, if I were to consider everything people expect and want or would like to, I would be crazy. Like, from what I'm hearing from John and Albert is like, we like our careers, we like our work, and we've grown in it. I think if you were only thinking about money, you would have an MBA, you wouldn't be here listening to us. So just enjoy your passions. But that's my personal advice.
Great, thank you. And the last question that came in through the Q&A, this person really is wanting advice about, for someone starting their library career while also working on completing another degree, if you have any advice on that. And this person is someone who has or is currently earning an MSLIS and is hoping to work in GLAMs before doing an MA.
I'd say, and it's kind of going back to what Margarita was talking about. I think as much as possible, try to gain that experience through internships, GRA-ships, and use that time while you're in school, right? Where you might have some bandwidth, right, to try different things, to be able to explore how to best identify what additional degrees you might need. Again, there's an asterisk there. It really does depend on where you end up in and where you want to go.
Great. Thank you so much for that. We're almost out of time here. So I want to ask our three panelists if there's any last minute, very short advice that you'd like to give our attendees today. Otherwise, I'm going to say thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us and participating in the panel. And I don't want to necessarily guess what your answers are going to be, but I would assume we might be along the same thought lines. If others out there who are attending today should happen to have questions and after this ends, please feel free to contact any of us. I think we'd be happy to try to answer your questions and provide any advice or suggestions that we can. So as we round down our hour here, again, thank you very much, Margarita, John, and Albert for joining us. On behalf of the speakers, myself, we'd like to thank ACRL, especially Eloise Sharp, and the many people involved in making this series happen. We're also very honored that we get to close out the series today. We'd also like to thank Erica Jens and Beth DeBold for their involvement in making the series happen, as well as all the members of the planning group. For all of you attending today, thank you for listening to us live. And for those of you who will be listening to this in the future via recording, thank you. And we wish everyone a great day. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.